The knock came at the worst hour of the night, the hour when honest people are asleep and only trouble is still walking the road. It was a hard, uneven pounding, a man's fist without any patience left in it, and it shook the door of the little house at the far edge of Sundance Fork until the latch rattled in its plate. Mercy Aldous was already awake. She had not been sleeping well for 3 winters now, and the sound of a fist on her door in the dark did not frighten her as it once might have. She lit the lamp with a steady hand, drew her shawl over her nightdress, and crossed the cold plank floor in her bare feet. "Who is it?" she said, not loud. She did not open the door yet. "My name is Caleb Rourke," came the voice through the wood, ragged, close to breaking. "I've got my brother out here in the wagon, and he's burning up. He's been out of his head since sundown. Please, they told me down the road you know something about fevers." She opened the door. The cold came in first, and then she saw him, a lean young man in a range coat, hat gone, his face gray with the kind of fear that has no bottom to it. Behind him, a wagon stood in the road with a lantern swinging from the seat rail, and in the wagon bed, wrapped in every blanket the man seemed to own, a boy lay shivering and still at the same time, which is the worst way a body can lie. "They told you wrong about a great many things in this town," Mercy said, "but not about that." "How old is he? 14? He's 14. How long has he had the fever?" 2 days. It was low at first. Tonight it climbed, and it won't stop climbing. His voice cracked clean through. "I didn't know where else to go. The doctor's out at the Carrises with the baby coming, and every other door I knocked on tonight, they looked at your name like it was a warning and sent me on." She understood exactly what he meant. She had lived under that warning for 3 years. "Bring him in," she said. "Bring him in out of the cold, and be quick and mind his head on the door frame." He carried the boy in his arms as if he weighed nothing, and Mercy saw at once that the man had been carrying him a long while, because his own arms shook. She had the lamp turned up and the bed by the stove cleared before he reached it. "Lay him here, close to the fire, but not against it." She was already moving, and moving is a thing that steadies the hands. "Take those wet blankets off him, all of them. The wet is holding the heat against him and cooking him from the outside in." "He'll freeze," Caleb said. "He'll do no such thing. Trust me, or take him back out to the cold and let me sleep. It's one or the other, Mr. Rourke, and you've got about 4 seconds to choose." He chose. He stripped the sodden blankets away, and she covered the boy instead with a single dry sheet, and she pressed the back of her hand to the child's cheek and then to the hollow of his throat, and her mouth went thin. "What is it?" Caleb said. "He's too hot to keep. Fill that basin from the barrel by the door, and don't warm it. I want it as it comes." The boy stirred and muttered something without sense in it, a name maybe, and Caleb went to his knees beside the bed with a sound she pretended not to hear. "Tom," he said. "Tom, you stay with me now. You hear? You stay right here." Mercy set the basin down and wrung out a length of clean toweling. "He can hear you," she said, quieter now. "A fevered mind hears more than it lets on. Keep talking to him. Say his name. Give him a road to walk back on." She laid the cool cloth along the boy's throat and the insides of his wrists and the backs of his knees, the places where the blood runs close to the skin. And she worked without hurry and without stopping, cloth after cloth, wringing and turning and laying them down, and the man watched her hands, and slowly, slowly, some of the terror went out of his shoulders. "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "From a woman who is dead now," Mercy said. "She kept a book. That was all she said about it that night. But she thought of the book on the shelf above the flour bin, oilcloth covers gone soft as cloth from handling, and she thought of the woman who had pressed it into her hands and said, "A nurse is never shunned for long, child, because sooner or later the town gets sick." She had not believed it. She was beginning, tonight, to wonder. The town had a name for her, and the name was Thief's Widow. 3 years back, her husband, who had kept the accounts for the new church and the new schoolhouse both, had emptied the building fund of every dollar the congregation had scraped together, a little over 300, all told, in coin and subscription notes, and had ridden out on the morning coach with a woman who sold hats in the next county. He had died of a lung fever in a mining camp before the first snow, alone, and the town could not reach him to be angry, so it turned and looked at the wife he had left behind, and it decided, without any proof at all, that she must have known. She had not known. But there is no ledger anywhere that can prove a thing a person did not do. So the whispers settled on her like a second skin. The women drew their skirts aside on the boardwalk. The store gave her the back counter in short wait. The church, which her own husband had robbed, seated her in the last pew where the draft came under the door, and she went anyway every Sunday, and put a coin in the plate every Sunday, and no one ever asked why. Now here was a stranger's boy burning up on her only bed, and the stranger himself watching her as though she had hung the moon. Toward 2 a.m, the fever broke its first crest. The boy's shivering eased, and a light sweat came up on him, and Mercy exhaled a breath she had been holding for an hour. "There," she said. "There it goes. That's the turn. It'll climb again before dawn. A fever like this comes in tides, but the first turn is the one I was waiting to see." "He's going to live," Caleb said. It was not quite a question. "He's going to live if we don't get proud about it. Now sit down before you fall down and drink this." She put a cup of willow bark tea into his hands, bitter and cooling, and made him drink it, though he had not asked for anything for himself all night. "You've been more use to him tonight than any doctor. Do you know that? You held on. Half of what ails a fevered child is watching the people around him give up." He drank and looked at her over the rim of the cup and said, "The town's wrong about you. The town is rarely wrong about the things that don't matter and rarely right about the things that do," she said. "Drink your tea, Mr. Rourke." They sat the rest of that night out together, and by the gray of first light the boy Tom was sleeping a true sleep, his breath long and even, his skin cool and damp instead of dry and burning. Caleb Rourke stood over him a long moment. Then he took his hat up off the floor where it had fallen and turned it in his hands, and Mercy saw that he did not know how to leave. "What do I owe you?" he said at last. "Nothing you can put in my hand. That's not an answer a man can live with. Then here is one you can. Take him home slow, keep him warm and quiet 3 days, feed him broth and not much else. And if the fever climbs past what your hand can bear, you come back here and you knock on that door again, and I don't care what hour it is." She wrapped a twist of the willow bark in paper and put it in his coat pocket herself, because his hands were full of hat. "That's the whole account. Now go, before the town wakes and sees whose door your wagon stood at all night." He looked at her then in a way no one in Sundance Fork had looked at her in 3 years, not with suspicion and not with pity, but with a plain and open respect, as if she were a person and not a rumor. "They'll see it anyway," he said. "I don't much care if they do." He was the new foreman out at the Holloway spread, 6 weeks in the country, young for the work and good at it. And he had a 14-year-old brother in his charge and no one else in the world, their parents both a year gone. Mercy learned all this not from him, but from the town, because a thing like a wagon at the thief's widow's door does not stay quiet, and by noon that day the whole of Sundance Fork was chewing on it. "I heard the Rourke boy was near dead," said the woman at the store, loud enough to be meant. "And I heard where his brother took him." "I heard the same," said another. "A man that green, he doesn't know yet who to trust and who to shun." Mercy paid for her flour and her salt and took the short wait without a word, as she always did, and she carried it home past the church where the new roof was going on at last, 3 years late, paid for penny by penny out of collections the town had bled itself white to raise a second time. She did not go in the front. She went, as she always did, around the side, and there in the shadow of the vestry wall she did a thing she had done many times and thought no one had ever seen. She took a small cloth purse from her apron. She counted out of it what she had saved that month from taking in washing, $1 and some odd cents, wrapped tight. And she folded it into the subscription box for the roof fund with no name on it, as she had done every single month for 3 years. $29 and more she had put back into that box, coin by coin, quietly, against a debt of over 300 she had never been the one to owe. She could not give the town back its faith in her, but she could give the church back its roof, $1 at a time, and she meant to if it took her the rest of her life. What Mercy Aldis did not know was that the pastor, Emmett Hale, had seen her at the box the very first month, and had said nothing, and had kept a small private record ever since, a column of dates and figures in the back of his own book, initials only. A nameless benefactor whose gifts had climbed near $30, while the woman who gave them wore mended gloves to church and sat in the coldest pew. He had promised her nothing, because she had never asked him for anything. But he had promised himself that when the day came, and he believed a day always comes, he would not let her stand accused with the proof of her goodness locked in his own drawer. Caleb Rourke came back, not with a fever, but with a torn slicker across his arm and a careful expression. "I heard you take in mending," he said, at her door in the honest light of afternoon, where the whole town could watch him stand there. "And I've got a bunkhouse full of men who tear their coats faster than I can afford new ones. I'll pay the going rate and not a penny less. Will you take the work? You could get your mending done in town for less trouble to yourself," she said. "I could get it done in town for more trouble to my conscience," he said. "You saved my brother's life, and you wouldn't take a cent for it. Let me at least owe you honest money for honest work. That's not charity. That's a man paying his debts." She took the slicker. She took the bunkhouse work after it, and there was a good deal of it, and for the first time in 3 years there was money in her house that had not come out of a wash barrel, and she put most of it, still, into the box beside the church. He came for the mending himself every week, and every week he stayed a little longer than the handing over of a coat required. He fixed a sag in her gate one afternoon without being asked, and mended the loose step, and split a winter's kindling and stacked it against the north wall. And when she told him sharply that she paid her own way and had for 3 years, he only said, "I know you do. This isn't paying. This is a neighbor. There's a difference, and you know it better than most because you've been on the wrong side of the difference for a long time." The boy Tom came too. Once he was well, shy and grateful, and he called her ma'am and chopped her wood when his brother was busy, and asked her 100 questions about the willow bark and the fever tides until she found herself laughing, which was a sound her house had not heard in a very long while. "He talks about you like you're a doctor," Caleb said one evening. "I'm no doctor." "No," he said. "You're better than the one we've got. Doc Pruitt's a good man, but he was 3 hard miles away with the carries that night, and if I'd waited on him, my brother would be in the ground. Don't say that. It's true. I'll say the true thing even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He looked at her across the small, warm room. "That's a thing I've decided about myself lately." She did not answer that, but something in her, some door that had been bolted for 3 years, moved a little on its hinge. It could not last, of course. In a town like Sundance Fork, a thing that is good and quiet draws the notice of the people who cannot abide either, and the notice, when it came from Mrs. Vane. Cornelia Vane was the wife of the man who owned the mercantile, and she ran the Women's Aid Society, and she ran the church socials, and by a kind of unelected right, she ran the moral weather of the town. It was she who had first said, 3 years back, that the thief's widow must have known. She had been saying it ever since, and she had no wish to be contradicted now by a grain foreman's foolishness. She came to Mercy's door herself, which was something she had never once done, and she would not step inside. "I'll be plain," Mrs. Vane said. "There's talk about you and the Rourke man, and I'll not have the Aid Society's good name tangled up with yours, so you needn't trouble to come to the meeting this week, nor to the roof dedication Sunday. It would be better for everyone." "Better for whom?" Mercy said. "For the church, for decent folk. For that boy, even if you cared for him at all, do you think a family wants their sons keeping company at your table?" Mrs. Vane's mouth curved. "And I'll tell you a thing I've long suspected and never had cause to say aloud until now. That building fund your husband stole. Over $300 gone. A man can't spend $300 from the grave. I've always wondered how a washerwoman keeps a roof over her head and coal in her stove on what she earns at the barrel, and now I wonder it out loud. The accusation was so old and so wrong and so cruel that for a moment Mercy could not speak at all. "You think I've been living on the stolen money," she said. "I think the church would like its $300 back," said Mrs. Vane, "and I think a woman with a clear conscience wouldn't go so pale at the asking. Stay home Sunday. That's my counsel and my warning both." She turned and went, skirts snapping, back toward the town that would believe her, because it always had. That was the night Mercy came the closest she had ever come to leaving Sundance Fork for good. She got down the small tin from behind the flour and counted what was in it, enough, near enough, for a one-way seat on the eastbound coach, if she was careful, if she left the stove and the gate and everything else behind. She sat at her table with the coins in a little stack and the lamp burning low, and thought about a town where no one had ever heard the word thief set next to her name. Then she got up, and she took down the dead woman's book from the shelf, and she opened it to the back where she kept her own accounts, and she wrote in it, by the low light, one more small line. The $1 and some cents she had put in the box that month, because it was the truth, and the truth was the one thing that had never left her, even when everything and everyone else had. She did not buy the coach seat. She banked the fire and blew out the lamp and lay down in the dark, and she decided she would go to the dedication Sunday after all and take her cold seat by the door, as she always had, because she had done nothing wrong, and she was tired all the way to her bones of walking as though she had. Caleb heard of it, of Mrs. Vane at the door, of the whisper about the stolen fund, as a man hears everything in a small town, through the men at the bunkhouse and the boy who ran errands. He came to her the next evening with his jaw set hard. "You should let me speak for you," he said, at the dedication, in front of all of them. "I'll tell them plain what you did for Tom, and I'll ask any one of them to stand up and say they'd have done half as much for a stranger." "You'll do no such thing," Mercy said. "You've a brother to raise and a place to keep, and you're 6 weeks in this country. You tie your name to mine in front of the whole town, and you'll not have a place or a good name left by spring. I won't have it. I won't be the ruin of the only 2 people in this valley who've been kind to me. And if I don't care about the place or the name, then you're a fool, and I'll not have your foolishness on my conscience along with everything else." They stood a long moment, the 2 of them, and the fire snapped, and at last he put his hat back on. "You keep telling me what you won't have," he said gently. "One of these days I'd like to hear what you would." He left, and Mercy stood alone in her house and pressed the heels of her hands hard against her eyes and did not let herself cry, because crying was a thing she had given up 3 years ago as a luxury she could not afford. Sunday came bright and cold. The new roof shone on the little church, bought back at last, and the whole of Sundance Fork put on its good clothes and came to see it dedicated, and Mercy Aldous came too, in her one good calico, blue gone soft with washing, and she took her usual place at the back by the drafty door, and she folded her mended gloves in her lap and waited. Pastor Emmett Hale gave the reading and a thanks, and then, when the roof had been blessed and the congregation was warm with its own goodness, Cornelia Vane rose from the front pew, as she had plainly planned to do, and turned to face the room. "Before we go," she said, "there's a matter of honesty owed to this house, and I'll not sit quiet on it another day. We all know how our fund was robbed. 3 years we've bled to raise it twice, and there is one among us who has never answered for the first theft, who sits in this very room, and who has been keeping company of late in a way that shames us." She did not point. She did not need to. Every head in the church had already turned toward the last pew. "I ask her plainly, before God and this congregation, where did the money go, and how have you lived?" The silence that came down then was the loudest thing Mercy had heard in 3 years. She rose. She neither wept nor shrank. She stood in the cold draught by the door with her chin level and her hands quiet, and she opened her mouth to say the only thing she had ever had to say, which was that she had no idea where the money went, that she had never known, and she understood, even as she drew the breath, that it would not be believed, because it never had been. But she did not get the chance to say it. Pastor Hale had come down from the front, and he stood now in the center aisle, and in his hands was his own account book. "Open, Mrs. Aldous," he said, "with your leave. There is a record I've kept these 3 years, and I promised myself I'd not read it aloud unless the day came that you were accused of the very thing it disproves. That day has plainly come." Mercy stared at him. She did not know what he meant. She had never told a soul about the box. "Read it," she said, because nothing else came to her. So he read it. He read the dates first, one for every month across 3 years, and beside each date a figure, small and getting no larger, 60 cents, a dollar and a quarter, and beside each figure 2 letters that were her own initials set down by his hand, the day he had first watched her fold a washerwoman's coins into the roof fund box and slip away around the vestry wall without a name. $9.20, Pastor Hale said when he reached the last line. $29.40 given back to this church, in secret, a wash barrel's wages at a time, by the widow of the man who took it against a debt that was never hers to pay, by a woman this town would not sit beside. He closed the book. She has been paying back a theft she did not commit out of coins she could scarce spare for 3 years while we seated her in the draft. That is where your money has been going, Mrs. Vane. It has been coming home. No one moved. Cornelia Vane's face had gone the color of tallow. The congregation sat as still as if the roof they had just blessed might come down on them after all. Mercy Aldous stood at the back of the church and did not weep. She had been right for 3 years, and now the room knew it, and the knowing settled over her not like triumph, but like a window opened in a shut house, and she breathed. Then Caleb Rourke stood up. He had been sitting near the back with his brother beside him, and he rose to his full height in the quiet church. And he did not raise his voice, because he did not need to. "I've something to add to the pastor's account, if I may," he said. 6 weeks ago, I carried my brother to that woman's door in the middle of the night, dying of a fever, after every decent door in this town looked at her name and turned me away. She took him in. She worked over him till dawn and pulled him back from the edge of the grave. And when I asked her what I owed her, she said nothing I could put in her hand. He looked then, not at the congregation, but at her, across the whole length of the church. I've heard this town call her a great many things. Tonight you've heard what she truly is. I didn't come to Sundance Fork looking for a wife. But I've watched that woman pay a debt that was never hers, and keep faith with a church that gave her the cold seat by the door, and save the life of a boy who was nothing to her but a stranger's child in the dark. And I'd be a poor sort of man if I let her stand up here accused and did not stand up with her. His voice did not shake, but it dropped, so that the whole church leaned to hear it. Mercy Aldous, I'm asking you before all of them, and not behind their backs. If you'll have me, I'd count it the honor of my life to keep faith with you the rest of mine, as you've kept faith with everyone who never earned it. For a moment, the widow the town had shunned could not answer at all. She had spent 3 years learning to expect nothing, to ask for nothing, to stand in the cold and want nothing where anyone could see her want it. And here, in the coldest corner of the room, before the very congregation that had put her there, a good man was asking her, out loud, in the light, to be wanted. "You know what it will cost you," she said, and her voice carried, because the church was that quiet. "The talk won't die because a pastor read a book. There'll be some in this room who go on believing what suits them, no matter the proof." "Let them," Caleb said. "A man doesn't choose his wife to please the people who wouldn't sit beside her. He chooses her because he's seen who she is in the dark, when no one was watching and there was nothing in it for her, and she did the right and hard thing anyway. He held out his hand, plain and open, down the length of the aisle. I've seen who you are. I'd choose you in front of the whole world, and I'm doing it now." Mercy Aldous came out of the last pew. She walked up the center aisle of the church that had seated her by the draft for 3 years, past the women who had drawn their skirts aside and the men who had given her short weight, past Cornelia Vane, who could not meet her eyes, and she neither hurried nor gloated, and she put her hand into the hand of the foreman who had chosen her where everyone could see. "I'll have you," she said. And I'll keep faith with you, Caleb Rourke, all my life. But I'll tell you the same thing I told you the first night. Half of what ails a body is the people around it giving up. You held on for your brother in the dark. I'll hold on for you in the light. That's the whole account. And there's no debt in it on either side. The boy Tom, near the back, made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else, and put his sleeve to his face. They were married before the first snow, in the same little church, and Mercy did not sit in the last pew that day. She sat in the front, in the good blue calico, with the mended gloves folded in her lap, and Pastor Hale wrote her name at last into the church book in full. Not as the thief's widow, and not as a nameless benefactor in initials, but by her own name, credited coin by coin with a roof over all their heads. The town did not change all at once. Some of it never changed. Cornelia Vane went on running her socials, but her word did not carry the weight it once had, for the church had heard, out of its own pastor's book, what her certainty was worth. But the doctor, Pruitt, took to sending word to the little house at the edge of town when a fever ran through the valley faster than one man could ride, and the mothers of Sundance Fork, one by one and never all at once, began to knock on Mercy's door in the worst hour of the night, when honest people are asleep and only trouble is still walking the road. And she always opened it. She lit the lamp with a steady hand, and she said what the dead woman with the book had taught her to say, and it was the truest welcome in that whole hard country. Bring him in, she would say, into the cold and the dark. Bring him in out of the cold, and be quick. We'll bring the fever down together, you and I. That's how it's done. That's how it was always done. If you've made it this far into the story, then you already know the kind of person this channel was built for. The ones the town writes off, who go on doing the quiet right thing in the dark with no one watching and nothing in it for them. So tell us before you go, would you have opened the door that night to the widow the whole town had warned you against? Or would you have driven your wagon on to the next house and the next and let the boy's fever climb? Stay with us and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe if you believe the door ought to open.